Hi everyone, my name is Matthew. I'm a classical pianist and translator, and in today's video, I'd like to talk about slow practice, which I think is probably one of the most frequently misunderstood concepts when it comes to learning music. So in today's video, I'm going to talk about how a lot of us already slow practice, as well as giving some tips about how I think that we can slow practice a little bit more effectively, especially based on what we know about neuroscience and how the brain absorbs and retrieves information for when we're performing or recording or whatever it might be. So I hope that today's video will be useful. Let's get right to it. So what is slow practice and how do we often do it? Well, it seems obvious, right? Slow practice is playing things slowly. And I think that a way that a lot of us slow practice already is, at least I'll speak for myself, is sometimes we just play through a passage slowly, kind of vaguely hoping that, something's probably getting better, right? I'm doing the right thing because slow practicing is good. The only problem with this is that it can be reinforcing bad habits. And when I say bad habits, I mean, even though you might be playing the right notes and maybe with the right rhythms and everything, there are many things that we could be doing wrong that might not be obvious immediately, but that later on, especially when we start to play the piece at tempo, those weaknesses, those details that we didn't consider are going to start to surface. So when we're slow practicing, if you take away nothing else from this video, I think the most important thing is that practice makes permanent. I think that that's maybe a better axiom than practice makes perfect or practice makes better. Practicing makes permanent, and that includes slow practice. And the reason why this is this is something I just found out not too long ago in the last couple of years, that after we've been doing something, it doesn't matter, we've been, playing a certain passage, immediately after we've just finished playing that, our brain very helpfully or unhelpfully, depending on what we've just been doing, repeats that passage for us like on a loop at something between, I've seen different numbers, like 10 to 15 times speed. So it's like running a really fast, kind of high quality a film, like a replay of what we've just been doing 10 to 15 times speed. So when I first found this out, this was absolutely terrifying, as it might be for you as well, because all of a sudden I realized, oh my God, I haven't been, I've been feeding my brain all kinds of wrong information at the keyboard. I mean, I do things all the time that I didn't mean to do that. And, you just kind of casually do it over again. And then in performance, those passages often don't go the way that we want them to. And it's because we've been confusing our brain. We've been telling it on the one hand, not intentionally, like we don't hit wrong notes intentionally, but the brain doesn't distinguish between the right and wrong information. It just takes whatever you give it, whatever input you give it, and it, as I said, it runs that on a loop for you. So when we're performing, and if there's a certain trouble spot where we've been having difficulty really nailing it, but we haven't been very disciplined about really being totally accurate each time we play it, that's why often in performance we'll still end up messing it up, because we've been giving our brain mixed signals. Maybe half the time you get it right, half the time you don't. And so your brain just kind of basically doesn't know what it's supposed to do in performance. And because we get nervous and, we're self-conscious during a performance, we're even more likely to make a mistake, right? So of course your brain's going to kind of recall the wrong version, or maybe it's more accurate to say it doesn't have an accurate, solid enough picture of what you want it to do. So there isn't that kind of really strong mental picture for the brain to recall. And so basically there's not enough good quality data that we've given our brain, and we end up messing up. So we need to really be creating a very, very kind of high definition picture of what we want, feed that to our brain so that then our brain can kind of help ourselves to do that when we want it to. In other words, during a performance, let's say. So how can we give our brain a high quality image, a high definition film to replay for us? The first thing I would recommend is to work in detail. And maybe one of the best things to do is to actually just study the score before you even play. And if it's a piece that you don't know at all, maybe you can, you just need to spend a little bit of time just hearing the notes at the piano, of course, or listening to a recording or whatever. But assuming it's a piece that, you know how it goes, so to speak, I think that you can be doing a certain amount of, depending on your comfort level, I think you can certainly do some score studying away from the piano. And I mean, something that I don't do nearly often enough, but whenever I have done it, it's been very helpful, is when I have, say, an afternoon coffee, to use those 15 to 20 minutes instead of maybe reading a book or watching YouTube videos, is to actually just take that time and to set aside that time to score study for 15 to 20 minutes, and I'll pick a certain passage that I want to really focus on, and I'll try to analyze everything about it. So what kind of phrasing would I like to do dynamically, in terms of articulation, pedaling, fingering, the exact physical gestures that I want to use. So planning out everything as much as I can. And in one of those Dover volumes of interviews with great pianists, not the more recent one, but the really older one, which has interviews with like Busoni and Godowsky, like the Golden Age pianists. I think it was Ernest Hutchison in that book who said, don't work on more than you can do perfectly in one practice session. So in other words, and he would have said it more eloquently than that. I'm sorry, I don't remember the exact quote right now. But basically, don't bite off more than you can chew in one practice session. So if all you could manage to do really perfectly in a single practice session is, depending on the difficulty of the piece, maybe one line, maybe half a page, one page. It also depends on how fresh is this piece, or is it a piece you know pretty well already. But basically just to work in really high definition detail on only as much as you'll be able to do perfectly. And this actually matches up with what we know now about the neuroscience of how the brain stores information. So it's interesting, even, over 100 years ago, he got it right, but maybe not for the reasons that he thought, because of course, scientists just didn't know this at the time. So nobody knew this at the time about how the brain is actually working sort of, under the hood. But that's absolutely right. And I think that it's very important to be aware of that whatever we're doing, the brain is copying that exactly. So practice makes permanent. And something too that you could try is, I think it was Neuhaus, maybe in his book on piano playing, who had the idea of, and this is, I'm sure, many professional pianists, this is probably just how they practice in general, but something you can also do, because you might think, well, maybe I don't want to just commit to one particular interpretation. I want to leave open the possibility of being carried away in the moment and being inspired. And so this is something that I'm pretty sure Neuhaus, I believe it was him who suggested that you can prepare 3 or 4 alternative interpretations for a given passage, so that in the moment, you have kind of a variety of different choices to select from. So you're not limited to only one interpretation, but at the same time, those other alternative choices, you've also prepared very well too. So that's another idea too, if you want to still leave open the possibility of a certain amount of freedom in performance. And I think that if you really have prepared a piece like that, so if you've prepared a bunch of different variant interpretations and you've really worked on every level of detail like that, in the moment of a concert, chances are you will be able to try something totally new, and it would still be more likely to go well just because of that level of preparation you've done. So work in detail and experiment with different ideas before you commit to maybe one or a couple of interpretations for a certain piece, because whatever you do, your brain will make it permanent. The next thing I'd like to really emphasize, and to be honest, I cannot emphasize the importance of this enough, is to make absolutely certain that whatever motions you're using at the slow tempo are exactly, like to a T, the exact same motions you will be using at the quicker tempo. Because whatever you're doing at the slow tempo, if it is not the exact same motions that you're going to be doing at the quick tempo, it's just not going to work later on. So if you're playing a piece like, say, the Black Key Etude by Chopin, and if you are doing these very big, exaggerated motions, thinking that it's more expressive, let's say, if that's not how you're going to be playing the piece later on, if you're going to be playing it more quickly, then that's just not going to work, because you're giving your brain 2 completely different just sets of physical information to learn. And if you try to play it, of course, with those motions at a quick tempo, it also won't work, because there's just too many wasted excess motions. So you're probably going to get tense and your arms are going to hurt by the time you get to the end of the piece if you try to play it at tempo with those kind of motions. So whatever you're doing physically, I think, if nothing else, if you don't really feel like, I don't know, score studying that much, or if, I don't know, if you don't really want to think about the phrasing or something too much, everyone's different, right? I don't know if any of those things apply to you. At the very least, just make sure that you are, if not planning out before you even get to the piano, at least when you're at the piano, really make sure that you're breaking it down to, I mean, literally note by note, one interval at a time. Pretend you're like a total, like day one beginner at the piano and you can only play one interval at a time, and just study like how the hand, the arm, the elbow, the shoulders, everything work going from between one note to the next, and really make sure that you know exactly what you want to be doing later on at full tempo. The next thing I have here on my little handy list of points I wanted to talk about today is to work in short segments. This is kind of what I was talking about as well with Ernest Hutchison. So with that quote, I mean, so to make sure that you don't take on more than you can do well at any one time. And someone actually in a YouTube comment had a very good idea. They said that their teacher told them to not practice more than 2 bars at once. So in other words, in one go, so to speak. Of course, you can work on more than 2 bars in a practice session, but not to play more than 2 bars, let's say consecutively. So to have that kind of that stop, to make sure you're not kind of going on and just not reinforcing the best habits, because I mean, at a certain point, we will have to play a lot more than 2 bars. We're going to have to start running the whole piece, or at least pages or sections of the piece. But to begin with, in the initial learning stages, I think it's very good to work on small chunks. It doesn't have to be 2 bars, but just to have some kind of a stopper to make sure that you don't get too carried away and just start playing through basically the whole piece over and over and over, which is something that, I mean, I think we all do from time to time, perhaps more often than we'd like to admit. I know I still do it more often than I'd like to admit, despite knowing not to do it. But at least, we should be aware of that so we can kind of bring ourselves back on track from time to time when necessary. And coming back to, or rather relating back to the fact that I said about the neuroscience of how the brain, repeats on a loop whatever we've just been doing. One thing that I've read or learned about also in the last couple of years that's very effective is basically, if you want to leverage that fact about the brain to your advantage, is to practice, let's say, take your 2 or 3 bar section, really focus, think about how you want to learn that, or how you want to sort of, embed that in your brain, and do it. Do the, run the 2 or 3 bars, whether it's at, a slow tempo or maybe medium tempo. And then just take a little micro break. So just take like 5 to 10 seconds and don't do anything. Just kind of stare out into space and let your brain do that. Assuming that, that's why it's important to really focus as much as possible, because if you have just given your brain the best quality input that you're capable of, you've considered all the details, and then you do it, that's something that's like, you want to keep that snapshot. You want to tell the brain, oh yeah, keep that one, save that one, please repeat that for me, about 100,000 times, please and thank you. So that's a really effective way, which again is backed up by neuroscience, a really effective way to absorb the information, the piece, more quickly. And the last bit of advice I have for today is to check things at tempo, at the full tempo, but in small, short bursts. So again, coming back to what I was saying about making sure that you're using the exact same motions at the slow tempo as you are, or as you will eventually use at the quicker tempo or at full tempo, you want to make sure that whatever you're doing, whether it's the fingering you've chosen or the actual physical motions themselves, are going to work, right? Just you want to make sure that it is actually going to work later on. So it's really good, even as you're slow practicing and you're really, you're trying to give your brain this really good quality, kind of very nutritious information that, it will then repeat for you. You also want to do little checks here and there to make sure that you're not just totally, veering off course. Because like with my example with the black key etude, if you are practicing like this, for like 10 hours a day, it doesn't matter if you do that for 6 months. Eventually, when you do try to play it the first time at tempo, even if it's just a little chunk, you're going to realize, oh no, I've been wasting so much time, because that's not going to cut it, right? That's not going to work. Just physically, it won't work. So yeah, just to reiterate, just make sure that from time to time throughout a practice session, and it can just be really tiny things. It could be checking like 3 or 4 notes in a row, just to make sure, maybe, with this, like, just like make sure that you're hitting that note, let's say, maybe you want to check, or maybe you're hitting that you're aiming for the thumb, or whatever it might be. You just want to do little checks to make sure that whatever motion you're doing, you are actually going to hit those targets that you want, those physical targets, musical targets. So in other words, you're going to be playing it at the tempo you want, with the right gesture, with the musical expression that you want, the dynamics, the articulation. So do little checks throughout your practice session of just really, really short little bursts, especially in the initial learning stages. Later on, as I said, there does come a point when we do have to start playing through maybe a page, 2 pages, and then a whole, if it's a sonata, maybe the whole exposition, and then the development, and then eventually, building up movement by movement until we play the entire thing, right? There does come a point where we can't only be doing slow practice and little short bursts forever. Like at a certain point, we have to train our brain to, run through the entire thing from start to finish. But at least at the beginning, all of these things that I've said today, these really are especially important in the beginning stages of learning a piece. So just before wrapping up today's video, I would just like to say in conclusion, as a sort of maybe a final parting thought, that all of this might sound like a lot of work, and in some sense it is. It does take a lot more focus to do. But in the long run, and even to be honest, in the short run, you'll find that you're saving a lot more time. You're going to have a much better kind of grasp or grip on the piece that you're learning. And your performances are more likely to go better, just because you've prepared basically at a better level, in more detail and more kind of high definition detail. You've fed your brain better quality information. So it might feel like it's more work, but to be honest, it will save you time, and pretty quickly too. I don't think you really have to wait all that long to start seeing results from this. Now, that being said, we all have different goals for different pieces that we're learning. I mean, just, as individuals, I mean, some people maybe want to be concert pianists, they want to record for the best labels or win a big competition. And, at the other end of the spectrum, there's someone that maybe they have no interest ever in, playing or recording anything in public or for YouTube, whatever. They just really just want to play at home in private. And, they couldn't care less if they're playing at, Carnegie Hall level quality, whatever. So we all have different interests. We have different ambitions and goals with our music making. So all the things I've said today, it's just another tool, or they are tools to have in your toolbox. So if there is a piece that maybe you do for whatever reason, a competition, recording, if you want to prepare something to the highest level, I think it's good to be aware of these things, at least to be able to use them. Because to be honest, even like I don't apply all these things all the time. In fact, a lot of the time I don't, even though I know I should be. Because also, not every piece I don't necessarily want to prepare to the same level. There are some pieces that I'm absolutely obsessed with, and I really want to play at the highest level that I'm capable of. And there are others that, just maybe I guess I'm not, professional enough, but, maybe it's okay for me to play pretty well, for my own enjoyment, and not necessarily it's not ready to, to go record for Deutsche Grammophon or Hyperion or whatever, but it's like, for my own enjoyment, it's enough, right? So we have different goals with the pieces we play. So that's something to keep in mind too, so if all this sounds very, overwhelming and, my God, every time I go to the piano now, it's going to be such, just work, right? It's going to be a slog just to get through a practice session, because, oh my God, I have to just be, so neurotically, focused every single second. Not necessarily. So it's something to keep in mind. These are just more tools that you can add to your toolbox if you aren't already using them. And as I've said, a couple times in the video, look, we all, even when we're aware of these things, it's kind of like, we know we shouldn't eat too much sugar, but a lot of us do eat too much sugar. I eat too much sugar. We know that we shouldn't be doing it, but, still sometimes we kind of, we slip, and we slip back into bad habits. And then, maybe we don't practice as efficiently as we know we should be, even though we know that, I hit a wrong note just now, and I know my brain is repeating that, but, it's like anything. I mean, it's for the first week or so after I found this out, I mean, I was so terrified. I think I only slow practiced for like a week. I was so, afraid to hit wrong notes or to do something wrong, because I knew my brain would be repeating it. But, it's just, I think it still helps to be at least aware of this information, so that, from time to time, if you need to, you can at least bring yourself back on track. So, don't feel bad if you're not applying all this stuff every second of every practice session. That's okay. We're human. I just hope that today's video has been helpful, that maybe you've taken away some new ideas about how to practice. Maybe it's gotten you excited to try out some of these ideas when you practice. So anyway, thank you for watching. If you've made it this far, thank you for watching to the end, and I will see you all in the next video.